Hello and welcome to Retrospectives, a video game history and review. Now, I love talking about video games. It's my second passion in life, only behind politics. But what's fun to do from time to time is to look at what never was. To look at some games that never saw the light of day. For every Sonic 06 that released, there's a Sonic Extreme and a Sonic Extreme that did not. These are some canceled games. Some unreleased titles are really popular, like Mario 128, Sonic 4 Episode 3, or the third Oracle game. But I want to focus on something more obscure, starting off with Game Zero. Imagine Minecraft, but on the GameCube. Well, it almost happened. Back in the Nintendo 64 era, which we will revisit later, one of the biggest games on the console was a video game adaptation of GoldenEye 007. It was created by Rare and directed by Martin Hollis. Soon after release, Rare began work on a sequel of sorts. It's not really a sequel because they didn't have the James Bond licensing anymore. It's complicated. It was to be directed by the same guy, but he left partway through development. The game did release as Perfect Dark, so it's not our subject. Instead, we want to turn our attention to Martin Hollis, who created an indie studio called Tsunami. In between this time, Hollis got friendly with Nintendo, so his first new game would be a GameCube exclusive. The game was codenamed Game Zero. It was teased a few times before going completely silent. We only learned what it was years later, a voxel-based survival sandbox game. It sounds a little bit like the best-selling game of all time. It was not going to be as open as Minecraft is. Instead, it was going to have connected Mario 64-like levels. You would mine and craft to collect some objects through these stages until moving on to the next. It seems fascinating and fun, but it never released because of technical limitations, namely not enough RAM to simulate all these mineable and buildable blocks. If Nintendo had only packed a little more power into the GameCube, we would be playing the best-selling Nintendo-exclusive Game Zero, but instead we're all playing the Xbox-owned Minecraft on every platform. Speaking of that company, Rare, they have many canceled games themselves, most of which can be attributed to being bought by Microsoft after almost exclusively making games for and with Nintendo. One that was not because of that buyout was going to be Timber 64. The game was going to star Timber the Tiger, obviously, and started as an experiment by Kev Bayless, where you played as a tiger cub and walked on all fours and climbed walls with its claws. But this concept was scrapped as Rare started work on Diddy Kong Racing. That tiger cub started out as the main character, but got sidelined in place of the Kong that the game ended up being named for. After release, Rare made two games based around two characters they made for Diddy Kong Racing, Banjo and Conker, starring in Banjo-Kazooie, and its sequel Banjo-Tooie, and the cancelled sequel to that, Banjo-3, and Conker's Bad Fur Day, and its cancelled sequel. There is going to be a third spin-off, Timber 64. Not much is known about this second version, but we assume it would have played similar to the other two games. It's unclear why it never really got off the ground, but we do know some elements ended up in Star Fox Adventure. Nintendo was making loads of cash off of Rare's amazing games on the Nintendo 64. So much so that Rare offered to be bought by Nintendo. Their reasoning was that Rare makes so many great games on the Nintendo 64 with their IPs and characters, and so it would be a no-brainer not to mix those with Nintendo's IPs and characters. But Nintendo refused. They declined to buy Rare. But it was fine, they would continue being second party, the GameCube was right around the corner, and Rare was stepping up their game. They had the aforementioned Banjo-3, Donkey Kong Racing, Conker's Other Bad Day, and more, all being worked on or planned. But before they could get very far, the offer to be bought was accepted. But it was not by a Nintendo who saw the light. It was Microsoft. They were launching their own console, the Xbox, and they wanted some skilled studios right out of the gate. Rare, with their catalog of IPs, years of experience, and name recognition, were perfect. Plus, it robs Nintendo of a much-needed lifeline. Fun story, Microsoft also offered to buy Nintendo, but they literally laughed it off. This buyout canceled a ton of games and prevented many more from being made, since Rare barely makes games now. My boy Sonic is not off the hook for canceled games. Oh no, 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 no! I already mentioned two, Sonic Extreme and Sonic Extreme. Extreme is not only the bane of autocorrect, but is the most well-known canceled Sonic game. It would have had a fisheye camera viewing Sonic from the side as he runs around a 3D world. It was more like multiple 2D paths stacked across with some occasional areas that are more open. There are also rumors of boss levels with completely different camera angles, but no footage has been found of these. It would have been Sonic's first true foray into 3D. Obviously, it did not release despite being a decent way along. Sonic would have had some new moves, such as a downward dash and a ring-throwing ability. All in all, it's probably a good thing that this never released because we got something much better a few years later. Sonic Extreme, on the other hand, was a pitch by Visionscape Interactive for the original Xbox. It showed Sonic skateboarding around what looks like a seaside hill. It did not get far, but it would have been a very on-brand game for the Blue Blur. If we look at Sonic, we have to look at Mario, who has some pretty interesting canceled games himself. The most interesting of which being Mario's Motors. It was a DS title that would have had players forming metal into motors for cars and then driving your creations. The vehicles would go faster and be all around better the better you did at making the motor. It is definitely an interesting concept, but from the pictures, it looks like too much work for not enough fun. Who here likes Terraria? It is if you took Minecraft, shoved a few too many mods into it, and made it 2D. It released back in 2011 and has simply been updated since then. But back in 2015, that could have changed with the planned release of Terraria Otherworld. It was described as a spin-off of the main game, taking place in an alternate version of the same world. But you can't fool me, this looks like a direct sequel, and a really good one at that. Sadly, it was cancelled back in 2018, apparently for not being good enough for the development team and being super behind schedule. Since we're getting closer and closer to the present, why don't we look at the sad story of Star Wars 1313. It was going to follow a young Boba Fett in the sleazy underbelly of Coruscant. The gameplay would have resembled Uncharted and not included any Force abilities. It was gearing up to be the greatest Star Wars game yet, being planned for the next generation PS4 and Xbox One, and being developed on the top-of-the-line Unreal Engine 3. Sadly, Star Wars' greatest enemy showed up and stopped it. Disney. The 2012 buyout resulted in LucasArts shutting down, along with all the projects being worked on or planned, including 1313. Those were some canceled games from throughout history. I barely scratched the surface. I could make many more videos on the same subject, and each would be completely unique from the last. If you want to learn more about one of the canceled games I discussed, or if you want to find something that I did not mention, head over to Unseen64. It's a website that collects all known info about canceled games and unused content in existing games. It's where I did all the research for today's video. Something that I never really do is ask you guys to subscribe. But if you like this video, or any of my other videos, please subscribe. It would mean the world to me and would help other people find this silly kid recording himself on his phone. Thank you all so much for watching. See you all later. Bye.